Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 22nd, 2024. Let me begin with some comments to reactions to yesterday's update, where I'm still hearing from some of you who say, why do you keep saying the British? The British have nothing to do with this. It's all the American empire. And that's a rejection of all the evidence that I presented yesterday that shows that the British have been calling the shots since the assassination of John F. Kennedy and have continued to do so after the fall of the Soviet Union. It doesn't mean that it's just a British empire. The British have attached themselves for over a century to the establishment in the United States, and there's an integration on the higher corporate levels, on the think tank levels, media, and so on, that is characteristic of an Anglo-American empire. And if you missed it, I'd urge you to read the speech I appended yesterday by Henry Kissinger in 1982, where he said explicitly that thankfully the US has not rejected the British role and that the British continue to be a decisive influence on American policy. Now, the reason this is important is that what we're seeing is a situation where the world is shifting away from that Anglo-American empire. And we shouldn't make the mistake of ignoring what is the root cause of that. Why is it that the empire is collapsing? Now, am I absolving the United States of responsibility? No, of course not. And you've heard me repeatedly go after the establishment in the United States, the corporate establishment, the military, industrial, financial complex, and also the American people for tolerating it. This doesn't absolve the United States, but it's a misallocation of responsibility which opens us up to being manipulated again and again and again. Since 1991, the US has been acting as the sole superpower, which asserts a rules-based order which is not based on international law, but on the decisions made by those who control the military-industrial financial complex, what is in their benefit and their interests, not the interests of the people whose nations they supposedly represent. This is a neo-colonial order. This is exactly what Kissinger said when he proclaimed his allegiance to the City of London at the Chatham House speech in 1982. Now, how do they operate this? Well, the enforcement includes sanctions, which are policies that are conducted by governments, but through the private banking system and the international banks. The cyber warfare, which the GCHQ and the Five Eyes are totally integrated with the National Security Agency of the United States. Funding opposition parties and networks. Funding includes US and British government funds. Coups and regime change. This has been a staple of US-British operations. False flag provocations and wars. All you have to do is look at the role of Cameron in the Libya war, or Blair with the second Iraq war under George W. Bush, or Thatcher prodding Bush Sr. in the first Iraq war. And you see the role the British have played. And you can add to that the Steele dossier, which was at the center of the Russiagate attacks on Donald Trump. Now, when the Willy Loman of US foreign policy, Anton Blinken, delivers his standard lecture to leaders of other countries, demanding that they submit to the rules-based order, does he not know that he's viewed as a world-class hypocrite? Is he unaware of the fact that the world realizes that the United States no longer supports international law, but chooses which areas of law it wishes to accept and runs roughshod over the rest of it? Doesn't he not know that he's viewed as a world-class hypocrite? Surely he must be aware of the growing isolation of the United States, especially at the United Nations, where recently the US has been the sole veto at the UN Security Council and was in a decided minority on the vote that was to grant statehood to the Palestinians, where the U.S. was one of 12 countries that opposed this, while 143 nations voted for it. Now, of course, he should be aware of this because that's why we have over $1 trillion defense budget. We have military forces and bases all over the world. Does he think the leaders of other countries don't see this? Now, let me give you some of the blatant examples of this hypocrisy. And in each of these cases, what's said of the United States could be said as well of the Sunak government of the United Kingdom and its Canadian counterpart. First of all, the U.S. Congress enacted a bill in which any opposition to Israeli policy is now branded as anti-Semitic. Secondly, nations investigating the foreign funding of color revolutions are threatened with sanctions. This is what the issue in the demonstrations in Georgia is all about. The idea that countries can't investigate who's funding the opposition to their governments. What happened to sovereignty? Is sovereignty not covered under the rules-based order? Of course it's not. Third example, UN Security Council decisions and World Court orders are interpreted as non-binding. That means the United States is the ultimate determinant of what's binding and what's not binding. The U.S. Congress is considering sanctions against the International Criminal Court on the basis that if Israelis can be charged, so could Americans. Well, accountability for America's rogue behavior is due. It's about time that American officials were held accountable for the mass murder of U.S. forces in the last 50 years, longer than that, going back to Vietnam. It hasn't happened. And that's one of the reasons the U.S. is standing behind Israel now and saying it will not allow Israel to be brought before the International Criminal Court, because the implications are the U.S. is complicit in that by providing weapons. Another example, despite all evidence to the contrary, U.S. officials continue to insist, as do NATO officials, that Ukraine can win the war against Russia and therefore should be funded to the hilt, meaning more Ukrainians will die and there'll be very little left of Ukraine when the dust settles, instead of negotiating. Negotiations and diplomacy are a key part of a real international order. And two final examples. Suppression of free speech in the United States, as is happening on U.S. campuses now, is considered legitimate to defend democracy. And finally, canceling elections, as Zelensky has done, is presented as a defense of democracy. Now, Russia and China issued a joint statement on May 16th that assesses the status and strength of emerging powers in the global South countries and regions. Their strength is constantly increasing, while the trend of multipolarity is accelerating. They went on to say, and this is from their official communique, countries that adhere to hegemonism and power politics are contrary to this trend, referring to the United States and our major allies. Such countries are attempting to replace and subvert the international order based on international law with a so-called rules-based order. There you have it. Russia and China have put this out in writing. What we've been saying about the rules-based order is contrary to international law and treaties. And the conclusion of this section of their communique is that they call for an international order free of neocolonialism and hegemonism. That's what the fight is about. And that's what we're calling on the American people and the people of Europe to join, to take our countries out from under the hammer of the global corporate cartels that are using our nations, our tax dollars, our people, to protect the special interests of a very small percentage of the establishment in the Western countries. The world is changing, and we'll either be facing a war to defend this collapsing order, or we can move into an era of peace based on mutual cooperation and cooperation for mutual benefit. Those who think the global corporate oligarchy are so powerful, well, you should read what they're talking about. They're completely threatened by this shift that's underway. Now, I'd urge you to go back and look at what I attached to the link to yesterday's update with the Kissinger speech at Chatham House. Also, today I'll be doing a weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and we'll be discussing these issues. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you can't get it live, you can catch it on the, it'll be archived. And then finally, let me again encourage you, take advantage of our free offer. 1 month free of the EIR, the Executive Intelligence Review, daily online news. This is 7 days a week. It's free, but the offer will not be there for too much longer. I'd encourage you to get on board now. See what we've been getting out every day, where I draw a lot of what I cover in the daily update. You need to know this too. So do your friends and associates. And if you take this seriously, it's the assimilation of these ideas of the LaRouche movement that will enable us to move the United States and the European nations out from under the control of the City of London and Wall Street. And that's what's necessary if we're going to save the planet. So thanks for joining me. Again, make sure you catch my discussion with Helga Zepp-LaRouche today, and I'll be back again tomorrow.